Hello, everybody. This is still the same day of my last video where I talked about how Russia is sort of portraying this conflict and why we shouldn't trust that. But I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the West's response, um, and things that I'm a little bit worried about going forward, that make this conflict a little bit more broad and more serious than just Russia and Ukraine, uh, and no other actors, right? So today, the United States and the EU announced that there would be a partial expulsion of Russia from the SWIFT banking system. SWIFT is one of the main ways that countries exchange their currencies, so it's the main global financial messaging system, right? And I want to read a few things. I want to read the NPR article that's sort of announcing that, some of it at least. I'm going to look at a New York Times article that sort of talks about the implications of that, and then I'm going to look directly at the quotes from a couple Russian officials, and I want to look a little bit at their export data as well. So I want to preface this, though, by saying that I am not saying that we should not sanction Russia. I think we should, because in the nuclear age, the way that undesirable behavior is to be controlled isn't done through warfare. When it comes to major countries, it's done through economic sanctions, and without that mechanism we don't really have much to do to try to help the Ukrainian people against this invasion. So I want to say that I am for sanctions, and also that I am not a policy expert and I don't know what alternatives there are to this exactly. But I do want to just talk a little bit about my concerns about what might happen in the aftermath of kicking Russia out of SWIFT. So let's go ahead and read the NPR article first. The US, Canada, and European allies are ramping up sanctions against Russia by moving to cut off certain Russian banks from the SWIFT payment system. The White House issued a statement saying, in part, "We commit to ensuring that selected Russian banks are removed from the SWIFT messaging system. This will ensure that these banks are disconnected from the international financial system and harm their ability to operate globally." SWIFT is a key mechanism in the global financial system that supports millions of secure messages daily to facilitate bank transactions worldwide. The White House did not initially back the SWIFT cutoff, noting in previous discussions about sanctions on Russia that it could have spillover effects. Alexandra Vacru, I'm going to be butchering a lot of names in this, executive director of the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University, described cutting banks from SWIFT as a nuclear option. In an interview with NPR last month, Vacru said that it could have wide-ranging effects. When Iran was cut from the system, she noted, they lost half their oil export, this is Iran, revenues, and 3% of their foreign trade. I believe that's all I want to see here, yes. So now you look at the New York Times, who is in this article kind of analyzing what exactly the effects of this might be. So we already know what SWIFT is. Okay, so can Russia be booted from SWIFT? There have been continuing discussions between the United States and its allies in Europe over whether to block Russia's access to SWIFT. However, the Biden administration could take that step unilaterally. If the United States decided to levy sanctions on Russian banks, it could then say that SWIFT was in violation of those sanctions by continuing to let those banks use its system. The Defending Ukraine Sovereignty Act of 2022, which Senate Democrats unveiled this month, would authorize sanctions on providers of specialized financial messaging services such as SWIFT, but the Biden administration could also impose such sanctions without the approval of Congress. Cutting a country's access to SWIFT is not without precedent. In 2012, SWIFT expelled as many as 30 Iranian financial institutions, including its central bank, in order to comply with the EU sanctions that were enacted in response to Iran's disputed nuclear energy program. Services were reconnected after the 2015 nuclear deal and then cut again in 2018 after the Trump administration withdrew from the pact and resumed sanctions. Okay, so key part of what I want to be talking about here: how might Russia respond? So Russia has faced, this is the scary part, Russia has faced such threats before. In 2014, when Russia invaded and annexed Crimea, there were calls in Europe to exclude Russia from SWIFT. Dmitry A. Medvedev, then Russia's prime minister, said at the time that such a move would be a declaration of war. It's a quote. According to the Carnegie Moscow Center, Russian forecasts at the time projected that being cut off from SWIFT would shrink the economy's gross domestic product by 5%. Last week, Nikolai Zhuravlev, the vice speaker of Russia's Federation Council, told the government-run news agency TASS that removing Russia from SWIFT would also have economic consequences for European countries, which he said would not be able to receive imports of Russian oil, gas, and metals as a result of Russia's being unable to receive foreign currency. Mr. Smith, the former Treasury official, said the United States and Europe might look for ways to exempt certain Russian sectors, such as energy, from sanctions. However, I can't read. Moves to cut off Russia's economy could have unintended consequences, such as Moscow retaliating that could rattle global markets. They are not without their own cards to play, he said. A switch to SWIFT alternatives. The threat of being cut off, this is the last thing I'll read. Well, it's not the last thing, but, the threat of being cut off from SWIFT might not be as dire as it was in the past. Several countries, including Russia, have developed their own financial messaging systems that, while less sophisticated than SWIFT, could allow Russian financial firms to maintain communications with the world. Russia began developing its system in 2014 amid threats of escalating sanctions from the United States. Mr. Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia, said last week that the new system was functional and that financial flows would be able to continue within Russia if the country was cut off from SWIFT. He acknowledged that international financial transfers could be complicated if that happened. Yes, they will be more difficult. It is obvious, but it won't be a catastrophe, Mr. Medvedev said. Some experts on Russia's sanctions agree that Western officials are overplaying the potential effects of disconnecting Russia from SWIFT. Cutting off Russia from SWIFT, it won't be as painful for Russia as Western officials envision, said Maria Snegovaya, a visiting scholar at George Washington University and co-author of an Atlantic Council report on U.S. sanctions in Russia. Okay, so one of those things linked to a Russian news agency article quoting Dmitry Medvedev about this. So just to get a complete sense of what he was saying, he says, SWIFT itself is a useful thing. It is a truly international system and a private system at that. I'll be straightforward. I don't really believe that someone would disconnect us from it because it would not bring any advantages to anyone, including this organization itself, arranged for SWIFT, especially since we have a huge number of transactions going through, he said, adding that such measures against Russia would only undermine the credibility of SWIFT. At the same time, the politician is convinced that Russia's own system for transferring financial data in the event of Russia's disconnection from SWIFT will work without failures. We have also prepared in this regard if something like this happens. It is our own financial data transmission system. It was prepared by the Bank of Russia. It's constantly being tested, and it works. It will not have a single minute of downtime and will perform all the necessary functions within the country. Speaking about transfers abroad, Medvedev noted that there are various ways to carry them out. Yes, they will be more difficult, it is obvious, but it won't be a catastrophe, Medvedev assured. The same applies to means of payment, he added. If we talk, for example, about credit cards, even cards of international systems within the country will still work because they are used for transfers within the country. International transfers. Yes, in this case, there will be certain difficulties. We have our own MIR cards, as you know, I don't know how to say that, which can also be used as an analog. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. So there's two routes that this can go. Number one, Russia's not bluffing, and it is true that the sanctions we're talking about might not have a huge effect. If that's the case, I am a little bit at a loss at what else we can do besides like a blockade, like a physical blockade. I could be wrong. I'm happy to be corrected on that. But I worry about a couple things with that. So if the sanctions don't work, Russia's just going to keep going, and they'll be emboldened by the fact that we don't have a reliable means of sanctioning their economy. However, I think that is, at least it's unlikely to the extent that the Russian government is saying. So Russia is saying, while it will make a few things difficult, it won't be a huge deal. I don't know if that's true. So listen, again, I want it to work. I want it to stop Russia from doing what it's doing. But the fact that in the past, only 8 years ago, Russia said that such a thing would be an act of war is a little bit scary, because I don't want war. So I'm a little bit afraid at the trajectory that the global society is going right now, in the sense that the relative peace that we've had in the post-World War II era, which has been, backed and enforced and maintained by the fact that so many countries have nuclear weapons, it's sort of necessitated as a way of international response, which I don't think it's fair to expect the world not to have, issues where a country kind of gets out of line, at least in their opinion, and they all kind of move in and do what they believe to be correcting it, right? So there's always going to be these sort of hostile interactions between countries. But the way that we've been doing that in the age of nuclear weapons, unless we're talking about smaller countries like Iraq, for example, is sanctions. So we can't really invade Iran, therefore we sanction them massively. We can't invade Russia, therefore we sanction them massively. And it seems like we're kind of nearing the end of our rope here. So while it's possible that it has no effect, that's bad for Ukraine, and it's bad for future Russian aggression. But if it does have a big effect on the Russian economy, let me look at the expert data very quickly. So OEC.world is a really cool website, by the way. So these are the 2019 exports. So take note that this is post-Crimea. This is after the sanctions on their economy. I don't think anything major was happening in Russia in 2019, right? So about 50% of their transactions are with Europe, okay? 30% is petroleum, 16% is refined petroleum, and 6% is petroleum gas. So a lot of that is energy. But what I worry about is that we might sanction them outside of the energy sector, like Biden or somebody was, suggesting. But then, okay, well, how much does that really affect them? Because we're talking about, I don't know, what is this? 50% of their economy is energy. So, I mean, the majority of their exports are unaffected by those sanctions. And then maybe we would decide, okay, no, actually, let's sanction the energy sector, because I think that is still on the table. I don't think we're going to avoid sanctioning the energy sector of their economy. Okay, that's 50%. If we're sanctioning everything, we're talking about 50% of this is going to Europe. Okay, and Europe is against Russia right now. And then there are other countries in here. I mean, the US is 3.5%, Japan 2.86%, I mean, Turkey 4%. These countries are also not friendly to Russia. The only friends that they really have right now are China and Kazakhstan and, the Russia friendly governments in the region. So I think it will have a major effect on Russia. And what would that mean? So Russia would be faced with a decision, right? And by Russia, I really mean the Putin government, which is, okay, pull out of Ukraine. If he does that, that is a major embarrassment for his country and a huge dent to his popularity. But if the sanctions do have a major effect, then even when he wins in Ukraine and he annexes or sets up a puppet government or whatever it is he does, even when he gets to that point, the Russian economy won't, like, the damage won't be made up for. They've already had a 33% drop in their markets. The ruble is declining in exchange rates. And given these sanctions, I don't see a world where that doesn't just like continue, right? I think that their economy will continue to decline. And make no mistake, Russia in large part is a declining power. And that's being made up for by the fact that they're allied with China, who is a rising power. But Russia itself, their GDP has really not recovered from the 2014 economic, damage that was done in part by sanctions and a financial crisis there. And so that, I think, will breed desperation. So Putin, I don't know how level-headedly Putin is going to take this. So Putin will probably be much less popular. There's already protests in Moscow. He'll probably be much less popular and his power might be threatened. Okay, so that's a personal issue that might breed desperation. And then Russia as a power might be desperate because of their, actions their actions are kind of failing to bring them back to the state that they appear to want to be. So if we reach a point where Russia is backed into this corner of, okay, I can get out of Ukraine, and then that would show me as being like a national embarrassment, and it would, I would look weak and all of that. Or they could stay in Ukraine and take massive economic damage. That's a world I don't want to be in. Because while I think that sanctions should be a tool to stop countries from doing this type of thing, I don't want Russia to be desperate. Russia is a nuclear power, okay? And these leaders, these governments are not infallible. They are not without error. In fact, a lot of the time they're stupid. We are lucky, actually, that Putin is as smart as he is. Because if another nationalist were in power and he just went crazy and did what Putin is doing, I don't know for sure that person would not use the nuclear option in the most literal sense. And last thing I'll say, if for some reason a war were to, and I don't want to sound the alarm here, but if a war were to break out in Europe broadly, where let's say sanctions fail and some European country like Poland or something says that they'll commit troops to help Ukraine, or maybe the sanctions work and Russia needs to be more aggressive to maintain economic stability and they invade something like Estonia. Obviously, it's not certain that any of this will happen. It's complete speculation. I'm not even saying I expect this. I'm just saying that we need to think about this possibility, okay? If that happens, I don't think that war would remain conventional. So we would see Russia not be in a good state in the sense that NATO is much more powerful than Russia. And so either China might get involved, which would be very bad, or Russia will use nuclear strikes to try to make up for their firepower disadvantage. So listen, I don't have any motivation. I'm a tiny channel. I don't have any motivation to be sensationalist or clickbaity or anything like that. I do not believe World War III is going to happen out of this. But what I worry about on a smaller scale is that there are some circumstances here that are showing the cracks in Russia's power structure. And that's not just a matter of Putin. It's a matter of the country's state in general. They want to be a global player. Everybody does. Every big country does. And to an extent, they still are. But their economy is very small for its size, for the country's size, and is not recovering at the speed I imagine they want it to be. And if this conquest fails, or if it comes at such a cost that it wasn't worth it at all, the social unrest in Russia would probably build a desperate, it would make for a desperate class of people in power. So again, I don't think the U.S. is going to go to war with Russia. I don't think NATO is going to go to war with Russia. I just think that we need to live in a place where the leaders of countries with nukes aren't crazy, even if we disagree with them, even if they're imperialists, okay, even if they're right wing, even if they're fascist, okay, we can't have an irrational, desperate leader backed into a corner that we might see if Russia really goes down the drain. So, listen, I'm not an expert on this type of thing. I don't know what other options the West has outside of booting them from SWIFT to sanction the Russian economy. I don't know. And it's very possible that I am scared for no reason. And it's very possible that, over time, things cool down and the dust settles and the people of Ukraine are able to rebuild. All of this is possible and maybe even likely. But while I did say at the end of my video looking at Putin's speech that we shouldn't panic because it's very unlikely that this would lead to a global conflict, unstable times beget unstable governments. And when a government is unstable and also has nukes to launch, even if it's a 1% chance, I don't want that to happen, and I think that we should avoid it. And I don't know what to prescribe for that. I don't know how we can avoid that, because I don't want to just let Russia gobble up everybody who's next to them. That's not good for the people of Ukraine. That's not good for the people of Georgia or anybody in that area. And yeah, so we're in a precarious position. Okay, I don't want to say that we are like on the cusp of nuclear war. We're not, but we are in a very tense situation, and tension can go in multiple directions, and some of them, even if they're unlikely, some of those directions, some of those paths are very detrimental for the state of the human species and global society. So I wanted to just vent that worry. Don't hate Russia. Don't hate the Russian people, and understand that there are also that governments are not perfect and that they might begin to act irrationally. So I understand that this was disorganized, and I'm uninformed on some of this, but I wanted to talk about it anyway. I would like to hear your thoughts. Like, comment, and subscribe. But yeah, I do want to know what you guys think, especially if you have more knowledge on the subject than me. I would love to hear how things might evolve from here. So thank you for listening. And I think I'm done talking about this now, unless something crazy happens. Yeah, so I'll see you in whatever is next. Bye.